The dust swirled around Eunji's boots as she carefully collected another soil sample from the barren landscape of XR 714. Her breath clouded inside her environmental suit, creating a small fog against the transparent helmet. The planet looked like nothing more than a wasteland, rocky, dry, and seemingly lifeless. Most researchers would have given up weeks ago. Not Eunji Park. She had been stationed at Outpost Delta for 8 months, studying what other scientists considered the most boring assignment in the current galactic exploration program. XR 714 sat on the absolute edge of human-explored space, a planet so unremarkable that it didn't even warrant a proper name, just a designation code. The research station hummed quietly behind her, a tiny bubble of human technology against the planet's endless rocky plains. Metal panels gleamed under the dim light of the system's pale star, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. Inside the station, her colleagues were likely playing cards, reviewing old reports, or sleeping through another mundane shift. Eunji knew they thought she was crazy. She could see it in their eyes. The subtle smirks, the quiet whispers when they thought she couldn't hear. "Park is wasting her time," they would say. "Nothing grows here. Nothing lives here." But something told her differently. Her latest collection kit clinked against her belt. Each sample was carefully labeled, dated, and stored with a precision that bordered on obsession. Where others saw emptiness, she saw potential. Where others saw a dead world, she saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. The environmental suit made movement difficult, but Eunji had long since learned to move efficiently. Years of research had taught her patience. Years of being overlooked had taught her determination. She wasn't like the other researchers who wanted quick discoveries and flashy results. She wanted to understand. A small indicator on her suit's display blinked. Oxygen levels stable, temperature regulated, radiation within acceptable limits. Everything was normal. Perfectly, boringly normal. But Eunji knew better. She knelt down, carefully using a specialized mini-drill to extract a core sample from the rocky ground. The drill made a soft, whirring sound, cutting through layers of stone and sediment that had remained untouched for millions of years. Each layer was a story, a moment frozen in geological time. The research station's communication system crackled to life. "Park, your shift ended 3 hours ago. Return to base." She ignored the message. Some of her colleagues had started betting on how long she would continue her seemingly pointless research. Dr. Kim, the station's lead researcher, had explicitly told her that her current project was a waste of resources. "We have limited funding," he had said. "We can't afford researchers chasing ghosts." But Eunji wasn't chasing ghosts. She was hunting something far more interesting. As the mini-drill pulled back, she noticed something unusual. Most researchers would have missed it. A slight discoloration in the stone core, barely visible to the naked eye. Where others saw nothing, she saw a hint of something different. Her heart rate increased slightly. Years of training had taught her to control her excitement. But something was different about this sample. Something was waiting to be discovered. The pale star began to set, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape. Another day of research completed. Another day closer to understanding the secrets of XR 714. Eunji Park smiled inside her helmet. Some stories begin quietly, and some of the most important discoveries start with something that looks like nothing at all. The laboratory was silent except for the soft hum of machines and the occasional beep of scientific equipment. Eunji leaned closer to the microscope, her eyes fixed on the strange cellular structure before her. Something was different about this sample, something that made her skin tingle with excitement. Most of her colleagues had gone to sleep. The research station felt empty, quiet, like a ghost ship floating in the middle of nowhere. But Eunji didn't mind being alone. Solitude was her best friend in moments like these. She adjusted the microscope's settings, increasing the magnification. The cellular structure looked almost like a complex network, with connections that seemed too deliberate to be random. Most researchers would have dismissed it as a technical glitch or an error in the scanning process. But Yun-ji knew better. Her fingers moved quickly across the computer keyboard, running a series of advanced analysis protocols she had developed herself. These weren't standard research methods. These were her own custom algorithms, designed to look deeper than anyone had looked before. The first results appeared on the screen, and Yun-ji felt her breath catch. The cellular structures weren't just unusual. They were impossible. Each cell seemed to have multiple connection points, like a complex communication network. But this wasn't how normal biological systems worked. These cells appeared to be talking to each other, sharing information, adapting, responding to environmental changes in ways that defied current scientific understanding. She remembered the core sample from XR 714. What looked like simple rock had revealed something extraordinary under her careful examination. The cells weren't just surviving. They were thinking. A notification popped up on her screen. Dr. Kim had sent another message, requesting a formal report on her research. He would not be happy with what she was about to discover. Yun-ji took a deep breath and began preparing her initial findings. She knew how the scientific community worked. They would challenge her. They would try to discredit her work. But she had evidence, hard, scientific data that couldn't be easily dismissed. The computer continued processing, revealing more and more complex patterns. Each layer of analysis showed something more incredible than the last. These cellular structures had a level of complexity that suggested something beyond simple biological life. She thought about the planet XR 714, a world that looked dead to everyone else, a world that most researchers had written off as nothing more than a rocky, lifeless planet. But she had seen something different from the beginning. Hours passed. The pale star outside began to rise, casting soft light through the station's small windows. Yun-ji remained focused, her eyes never leaving the screen. She was building something important, a discovery that could change everything humans understood about life. The cellular network continued to reveal its secrets. Each new piece of data was like a puzzle piece, slowly forming a picture that was both beautiful and terrifying. These weren't just cells. They were something more. A breakthrough was coming. Yun-ji could feel it in her bones. The research station remained quiet, unaware that inside this small laboratory, someone was about to challenge everything humans thought they knew about life in the universe. The alarm blared through the research station, cutting through the early morning silence. Yun-ji's hand shot out, almost knocking over a stack of data tablets before silencing the noise. Another sleepless night of research had passed, but she didn't care about exhaustion. Something big was happening. Her custom-built scanning system hummed with energy, processing data that no standard research equipment could handle. The spectral analysis she had developed was unlike anything in current scientific databases. Where other researchers saw noise, she saw patterns. Where they saw randomness, she saw a language hidden within cellular structures. Dr. Kim burst into the laboratory, his face a mix of anger and frustration. "Park," he shouted, "you've been running unauthorized equipment all night. This is a violation of station protocol." Yun-ji didn't turn around. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen, fingers dancing across the keyboard. "Look," she said simply, her voice calm and steady. The main display flickered to life, showing a complex visual representation of the cellular network. Lines of communication pulsed and moved, creating intricate patterns that seemed almost alive. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. Dr. Kim stopped mid-sentence. Even he couldn't deny what he was seeing. The cellular structures were communicating, not just responding to stimuli, but actually exchanging complex information. Each cell was like a tiny computer, processing and sharing data in a network more advanced than any artificial system humans had ever created. "This is impossible," Dr. Kim whispered. Yun-ji allowed herself a small smile. "Nothing is impossible," she replied. "We just haven't understood it yet." The research station had become a battlefield of scientific discovery. Her colleagues were split. Some believed her work was nonsense. Others were beginning to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. She had spent months developing special scanning technologies, custom algorithms that could peek into the microscopic world in ways no one had ever done before. Each line of code was a key, unlocking secrets that had remained hidden for millions of years. The cellular network continued its silent communication, pulsing, shifting, adapting. More researchers gathered in the laboratory. Whispers filled the room. Debates started. Some called her a genius. Others called her crazy. But no one could ignore the evidence on the screen. Yunji knew this was just the beginning. The samples from XR 714 were revealing something profound. These weren't just cells. They were a form of intelligence so different from anything humans understood that it challenged everything they knew about life. Her scanning system began to decode fragments of the cellular communication. It was like watching an alien language take shape, with patterns and rhythms that suggested something far more complex than simple biological processes. Dr. Kim approached her, his earlier anger replaced by a mix of curiosity and fear. "How long have you known?" he asked. "I suspected from the first sample," Yunji replied, "but now uncertain. We're not just looking at life, we're looking at something that thinks." The pale star outside began to rise, casting long shadows across the research station. Something massive was awakening, something that had been waiting, silent and patient, for someone to finally notice. Yunji Park had just opened a door that could never be closed again. The station's communication systems went dark 3 days after Yunji's discovery. At first, nobody noticed. Then, slowly, panic began to spread. Restricted access warnings flashed on computer screens. Research logs disappeared. Equipment began to malfunction in ways that made no sense. Something was happening, and Yunji knew exactly what, or who, was responsible. She worked quietly in her small personal laboratory, a makeshift space she had created in the station's least-used storage room. Personal computing devices, custom-built scanning equipment, and rows of carefully labeled sample containers surrounded her. This was her sanctuary now. The research team had turned against her. Dr. Kim and the station's leadership were doing everything they could to shut down her research. They feared what she might reveal. They wanted to keep her discovery silent. But Yunji was not going to be silenced. Her personal communicator blinked with dozens of blocked messages, official warnings, threats of removal from the research program, accusations of data manipulation. She ignored them all. The cellular network she had discovered was doing something extraordinary. It was protecting her. Strange electrical disruptions began occurring throughout the research station. Communication systems would randomly shut down. Research data would vanish and reappear in encrypted files. Equipment would reset itself, erasing any attempts to delete or suppress Yunji's research. At first, her colleagues thought it was a technical glitch. Then they began to suspect something more. Yunji understood what was happening. The cellular network was intelligent, more than intelligent. It was alive, and it was helping her. She worked faster now, knowing time was running out. Her custom equipment continued decoding the complex communication patterns of the cellular structures. Each breakthrough was another layer of an incredible puzzle. The station's security team began to watch her closely. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Whispers followed her through the corridors. Some researchers looked at her with fear, others with a mixture of curiosity and respect. But Yunji was beyond caring about their opinions. Her latest analysis revealed something shocking. The cellular network wasn't just communicating. It was remembering, storing information across generations in a way that defied everything humans understood about biological memory. Millions of years of history were encoded in these tiny cellular structures, waiting, watching, preparing. A soft alarm triggered in her personal laboratory. Someone was attempting to access her research files, but before the intrusion could complete, the files vanished, protected by something she was only beginning to understand. The cellular network was learning, adapting, protecting its secrets. Outside her small laboratory, The research station continued its routine. Researchers moved about their daily tasks, unaware that something extraordinary was happening right under their noses, unaware that the very definition of life and intelligence was being rewritten. Yunjai looked at her latest data set and smiled. They could try to stop her. They could try to suppress her research. But some discoveries cannot be hidden. Something was awakening, and nothing could stop it now. The first communication came on a Tuesday morning, just as the pale star of XR 714 began to rise. Yunji's custom interface flickered. Strange symbols danced across her screen. Not random noise, but something deliberate, something alive. Her hands froze above the keyboard, heart racing. She was no longer watching. She was being watched. The cellular network had found a way to communicate directly with her research equipment. Years of scientific training told her this was impossible, but the evidence was right in front of her eyes. Lines of complex data began to form, not in any human language, not in any known computer code. This was something entirely different, a language of patterns, of molecular connections that seemed to breathe with intelligence. Her personal laboratory had become a bridge between two worlds. The communication was like watching water flow uphill. It defied everything she understood about biology, about communication, about life itself. Each symbol was a story, each pattern a memory millions of years old. Yunji realized she wasn't just discovering something. She was being chosen. The research station around her had become a ghost. Her colleagues avoided her. The leadership had attempted to restrict her access to research equipment. But something was protecting her. Something was guiding her. The symbols continued to flow. Fragments of memory began to take shape, not in words, but in complex molecular patterns that her brain slowly began to understand. Images of a world long dead, memories of a civilization that had existed long before humans looked to the stars. These cellular structures were survivors. They had waited, watched, preserved their knowledge through millions of years of planetary silence, waiting for someone who could understand them, waiting for Yunji. Her custom interface began to translate, not with words, but with understanding. She saw glimpses of a massive conflict, of a civilization that had fought against something so terrible that their only survival strategy was to become almost invisible, to hide, to wait. The research station felt different now, smaller. The walls seemed to breathe with the knowledge of what was happening in her laboratory. Dr. Kim would never understand this. None of her colleagues would. They saw data. She saw a story of survival, a story of hope, a story of something far greater than human understanding. The cellular network continued its communication. Each pulse of data was a piece of a massive puzzle. Each molecular connection was a whisper of a history that had been waiting to be heard. Yunji understood now why she had been drawn to XR 714, why she had been so patient, why she had seen something where others saw nothing. She was not just a researcher anymore. She was a messenger. The pale star outside continued to rise, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape. Inside the research station, in a small laboratory filled with mysterious equipment, a conversation was happening. A conversation that would change everything humans thought they knew about life in the universe. Something was awakening, and Yunji Park was its first connection to a new world. The world outside the research station disappeared. Only the story mattered now. Yunji watched as her computer screens filled with a history older than human civilization. The cellular network revealed itself not as a simple life form, but as the last survivors of a galactic civilization that had faced total destruction. They called themselves the Keepers. Millions of years ago, their civilization had been powerful, advanced beyond anything humans could imagine. They had explored countless star systems, developed technologies that could reshape entire planets. But then came the Great Conflict. Images flowed through Yunji's research interface. Not pictures, but molecular memories, complex patterns that her mind slowly began to understand. She saw massive space battles, entire solar systems burning, a war so terrible that it threatened to destroy all intelligent life. The Keepers had a choice: fight and be completely destroyed, or survive. They chose survival. Their solution was extraordinary. They transformed themselves into the most adaptable form of life possible. Cellular networks that could survive anywhere, hide anywhere, remember everything. Each cell became a living memory, a tiny piece of a massive intelligence that could wait for years, for centuries, for millennia. XR 714 was not just a planet. It was a time capsule. The station's communication systems began to malfunction again. But this time, Yunji understood why. The Keepers were protecting their story, controlling the flow of information. They had waited millions of years. They could wait a little longer. Dr. Kim and the other researchers were becoming desperate. They knew something was happening, but they couldn't understand what. Yunji had become the bridge between two worlds. The cellular network showed her fragments of their technology, innovations beyond human understanding, ways of thinking about energy, communication, and survival that made human science look like child's play. They had watched human explorers for years, waiting, observing, waiting for someone who could truly understand. Each molecular memory was a puzzle piece, a story of survival against impossible odds. The Keepers had not just survived the Great Conflict. They had transformed themselves into the ultimate survivors. Their message was clear. They were ready to be discovered, but only by the right person. Outside, the pale star of XR 714 continued its slow journey across the sky. Inside the research station, a revolution was happening. One that would change everything humans thought they knew about life, intelligence, and survival. Yunji's hands trembled slightly as she continued to decode the messages. She was no longer just a researcher. She was a witness to the most important discovery in human history. The Keepers had chosen her, and nothing would ever be the same again. The cellular network pulsed with anticipation. Millions of years of waiting were about to end. A new chapter was beginning. And Yunji Park stood at the center of it all, the first human to truly understand that life could be so much more than anyone had ever imagined. The first military ships arrived 3 days later. They came without warning. Massive battlecruisers blocking out the pale star of XR 714, their dark hulls casting shadows across the research station. Yunji watched from her laboratory window as multiple international and corporate military teams began to set up perimeters. Someone had leaked her research. Military scanners swept across the planet's surface. Specialized teams in advanced environmental suits moved with precision. They were hunting something, and Yunji knew exactly what, or who, they were looking for. The Keepers. Her personal communication devices went silent. The research station's systems became a maze of encrypted messages and blocked signals. But Yunji wasn't worried. The cellular network had been preparing for this moment for millions of years. A military commander named Park Jae-sung arrived. Ironically, he shared her last name, but nothing else. Where she saw possibility, he saw only potential weapons. Where she saw life, he saw a threat to be controlled. "We're taking control of this research station," he announced during the first briefing. His voice was hard, military, uncompromising. Yunji said nothing. She didn't need to. The Keepers were already working. Strange technical failures began to occur. Military scanning equipment would suddenly malfunction. Communication channels would become scrambled. Advanced computer systems would reset without explanation. The military teams became frustrated, confused. But Yunji understood. The cellular network was protecting itself, protecting her. Corporate research teams arrived alongside the military. Their eyes were hungry. They saw the Keepers as a potential resource, a technology to be studied, controlled, weaponized. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Yunji continued her research in a small, isolated laboratory. Most of the station had been converted into a military research zone. Checkpoints, security scanners, armed personnel everywhere. But she was not alone. The keepers communicated with her through subtle molecular patterns. Each communication was a warning, a strategy. They had survived impossible circumstances before. This was nothing new to them. Military analysts began to realize something was different about XR 714. This wasn't a simple research station anymore. This was the potential battleground for the most important discovery in human history. Commander Park Jae-sung watched Eun-ji closely. He didn't trust her. She was too calm, too certain. "What are they?" he asked her one evening, his voice low and dangerous. Eun-ji simply smiled. "Something you cannot understand," she replied. The military teams continued their scans, their searches, their attempts to control something that could not be controlled. Outside, the planetary landscape remained unchanged, rocky, silent, waiting. But beneath the surface, something was preparing, something that had waited millions of years for this moment. The keepers were not just survivors. They were strategists, and this was only the beginning of their plan. The transformation began slowly, almost invisibly. Eun-ji's hands moved across specialized equipment that looked nothing like standard research technology. The military and corporate teams thought they were watching her. In reality, she was watching them. The keepers had chosen her for a reason. Her research had evolved beyond simple observation. Now she was creating something entirely new. A technology that blurred the lines between biological systems and advanced computing. Each molecular connection was a breakthrough. Each cellular pattern a potential revolution. Commander Park Jae-sung watched her with growing unease. Something was happening that he couldn't control. Something that scared him more than any weapon he had ever encountered. The first prototype emerged on a quiet morning. It looked like nothing special. A small device no larger than a human hand. But those who understood what they were seeing knew this was different. This was impossible. The device could adapt, learn, communicate across impossible distances. Military scientists ran test after test. Each test revealed something more incredible than the last. The technology seemed to breathe, to think, to understand in ways that defied current scientific understanding. Eun-ji was creating a bridge between human technology and the keeper's molecular intelligence. Specialized scanning teams discovered that the device could process information faster than any supercomputer. It could communicate through molecular frequencies that humans couldn't even detect. It could adapt to any environment instantaneously. The research station had become a battlefield of ideas. Corporate representatives saw potential profits. Military commanders saw potential weapons. But Eun-ji saw something else entirely. A new form of intelligence. A new way of understanding life itself. The keepers guided her hands. Each breakthrough was a carefully planned step. They had waited millions of years for this moment. They were not going to waste it. Strange reports began to spread. The device could heal damaged systems, repair complex machinery, communicate with other technological systems in ways that seemed almost magical. Commander Park approached Eun-ji one evening, his usual hard exterior showing a hint of fear. "What have you created?" he asked. Eun-ji simply smiled. "The future," she replied. The research station buzzed with tension. Everyone knew something big was happening, but nobody understood exactly what. The device continued to evolve. Each test revealed new capabilities. It could translate between complex systems, repair damaged networks, understand patterns that no human mind could comprehend. Military security became a joke. Corporate firewalls meant nothing. The device moved through technological systems like water, changing everything it touched. Eun-ji was no longer just a researcher. She had become something else, a bridge between two forms of intelligence, a translator for a language older than human civilization. The keepers had chosen well. Outside, the pale star of XR 714 continued its slow journey across the sky. Inside the research station, a revolution was happening, a transformation that would change everything humans, thought they knew about technology, intelligence, and life itself. Something was awakening, and nothing could stop it now. The final revelation came without warning. Yunji stood in front of the world's most powerful leaders, scientists, and military commanders. The research station's main conference hall was silent. Every eye was fixed on her. The device sat on the table, small, unassuming, waiting. "This is not just a discovery," she began. "This is a new form of life." Her presentation wasn't about technology. It was about understanding, about survival, about something far greater than any single species or planet could comprehend. The keepers had prepared her for this moment. She explained how the cellular network from XR 714 represented the most advanced form of intelligence ever encountered. Not a weapon, not a resource, but a living memory of an entire civilization that had survived the most terrible conflict in galactic history. The device on the table began to change. Its surface rippled like liquid metal. Patterns formed and dissolved. Complex molecular structures shifted and reformed. Those in the room watched in absolute silence. Military commanders looked terrified. Corporate representatives looked hungry. Scientists looked utterly confused. Yunji continued her explanation. The keepers were not just survivors. They were teachers. They had watched human civilization for centuries, waiting, preparing, looking for a species capable of understanding their true nature, and they had chosen humans. The device suddenly projected a massive holographic display. Millions of years of galactic history unfolded before their eyes. Battles that spanned entire star systems. Civilizations rising and falling. A conflict so massive that it had nearly destroyed all intelligent life. But the keepers had survived, by becoming something entirely new. Commander Park Jae-sung stepped forward, his hand reaching for a weapon. But before he could move, the device stopped him, not with force, with understanding. Molecular patterns danced in the air. Each pattern told a story. Each connection revealed a deeper truth about life, survival, and intelligence. Humans were not alone. And they were not the most advanced civilization in the universe. The device began to communicate, not with words, with pure understanding. It showed how the keepers had transformed themselves into the ultimate survivors, how they could exist in any environment, how they could remember and learn across impossible distances. Yunji was their messenger. The conference hall felt smaller. The world outside seemed to fade away. Nothing mattered except the story being told. A story of survival. A story of hope. A story that would change everything. The holographic display continued to shift, showing glimpses of technologies beyond human imagination. Ways of thinking that challenged everything humans believed about life, intelligence, and existence. Silence filled the room. Then someone began to clap. Then another. Then the entire hall erupted in a mixture of applause, fear, and pure wonder. Yunji looked at the device. The device looked back. Her story had begun in silence on a lonely research station. It was ending with a revelation that would shock the entire human civilization. The keepers had awakened, and nothing would ever be the same again.